It's a trip that could cost them their lives, crossing the thousands of kilometers from their homes in Central America through Mexico and on to the United States. Criminal gangs operate with impunity throughout much of Central America, making it one of the most dangerous regions in the world.
Mexico's southern border with Guatemala is 541 miles long. Like the U.S.-Mexican border, it has no continuous wall designating the international boundary, but fencing near populated areas and official border crossings. Mexico's southern borderline itself isn't heavily policed, as it's commonly known to be porous, if not easy to cross, compared to its northern border. Beyond the boundary line, border enforcement only intensifies as people move further into Mexico. On this map, the yellow plus signs represent official border crossings. There are 10 official ports of entry on the border and 8 represented here. The blue train tracks represent the 2 cargo train lines, or La Bestia routes. There's one in the north running into Veracruz and one in the south running to Oaxaca. The red houses represent various migrant shelters along common routes. And the blue stars stand for newly built customs facilities in Palenque, La Trinitaria, and Huitla. Since the late 1900s, the number of Central American immigrants in the United States has drastically increased. From 1980 to 2015, the population has grown nearly tenfold. There has also been an increase in migrants from the Northern Triangle apprehended at the U.S.-Mexican border. The Northern Triangle includes El Salvador, Guatemala, and Honduras. According to U.S. Customs and Border Protection statistics, apprehensions of Northern Triangle immigrants outnumbered those of Mexican immigrants in 2014, 2016, and 2017. Large-scale Central American migration is no new phenomenon. In the 1980s, civil wars, repressive regimes, and economic hardship, much of which supported by the U.S., drove significant numbers of Central Americans northward. Many Central American nationals sought to cross the Mexico-Guatemala border and seek legal protection and settlement in Mexico, as well as the United States. In Mexico, there were those who opened their arms and performed acts of solidarity to those fleeing their countries, and those that considered them a national security threat. Mexico was in a bind in that there was internal pressure to strengthen its southern border in the name of security, while on the other hand, the Mexican government was promoting an active foreign policy oriented towards solving the regional conflict with pressure from its involvement in international forums. These opposing positions resulted in a policy of humanitarian refugee assistance combined with lax border patrol. These practices have since changed as the United States has pressured Mexico to heighten immigration enforcement and militarize its southern region, so as to serve as another layer of security for its own southern border. Nowadays, the Northern Triangle continues to suffer from poor political and socioeconomic conditions, including some of the world's highest homicide rates and widespread gang violence, which drive ongoing migration. In 2014 was perhaps a turning point in Mexico in the U.S.'s collaborative effort to crack down on immigration in Mexico's southern border region. 2014 was the year that non-Mexican migration to the U.S. outnumbered Mexican migration, more specifically in July 2014. 2014 also saw a huge spike in unaccompanied minors, kids, and teens apprehended at the U.S.-Mexican border.
Unaccompanied children crossing the Mexican border isn't new. What's different now, though, is that the numbers have dramatically increased, and almost all of them are coming not from Mexico, but from Honduras, Guatemala, and El Salvador.
The number from the Northern Triangle peaked at 51,705. In response to these outcomes, the Obama administration put pressure on the Mexican government to do more to secure its own southern border. Obama held a meeting with Enrique Peña Nieto, the president of Mexico, to come up with solutions and help stem the tide. Immediately after the meeting, Nieto implemented a policy called El Programa Frontera Sur, or the Southern Border Program, in the southern states of Oaxaca, Chiapas, and Tabasco. Essentially, the 4 pillars of the program were 1. Protection of migrants, 2. Development of border towns, 3. Legal protection for asylum seekers, and 4. Security, deportation, and immigration enforcement. While the plan stated that it intended to safeguard human rights of migrants and increase security and development in the region, what resulted was something very different. The plan was rushed into implementation, due in part to external pressure from the United States for an immediate response. This immediacy greatly hindered aspects of the plan that were meant to protect migrants, develop the southern region, and improve legal processes for those seeking asylum or visas. What the Southern Border Plan did strongly implement was its objectives of national security, militarization, and immigration enforcement. To support the heightened security efforts, the United States gave Mexico money to help militarize its southern border region, as well as provide training to the enhanced immigration enforcement. In essence, the U.S. was having Mexico do some of its dirty work. This militarization was carried out in a number of ways. The program facilitated 1. Increased coordination among security forces among Mexico's Navy, the federal police, state and municipal police, the Army, and the National Immigration Institute, and neighboring countries. They've received access to improved technology, personnel, and training by the U.S. The result of these efforts has been skyrocketing numbers of detentions and deportations. Apprehensions on the Mexican side went up, and people arriving at the U.S.-Mexican border went down. This didn't last long, as in 2016, the number jumped back up again, proving that the crackdown wasn't actually stopping people from getting to the U.S., but just making their journey a lot more dangerous. The plan also facilitated 2. Raids on common migrant routes, where shelters and clinics are located. Such raids used to be very rare. There were also raids on La Bestia, which also increased in speed, acquired metal bars, and curved roofs to prevent riders. Raids in these popular areas forced migrants to walk in more remote areas and disperse from larger groups. People are increasingly attempting to migrate along the longest, northward route through the states along the Pacific coast where there are no migrant shelters, through Guerrero, Nayarit, and Michoacan, which are experiencing some of the worst cartel violence in the country. Another outcome of the plan is 3 new detention facilities operated by the INM, or National Migration Institute. U.S. personnel are consistently involved in training Mexican immigration agents in the detention centers. Mexico exclusively employs specially designated administrative detention facilities for confining undocumented non-citizens. Yet another outcome of the plan is 4. Police forces carrying out their own immigration enforcement operations, in direct contravention of the law of migration, which prohibits any agencies other than the INM from enforcing immigration law, except at the request of the INM. The final major outcome of the Southern Border Plan is 5, mobile enforcement operations carried out by the INM. This comes in the form of volantes, or temporary checkpoints that the INM personnel establish along roads. In another form is officials driving along major roads and capturing anyone they suspect is an undocumented migrant. Since the implementation of the Southern Border Plan, total migrant apprehensions increased by a staggering 85% during its first 2 years of operation compared to pre-program levels. There has also been a sharp increase in the number of migrants and asylum seekers who intend to stay in Mexico rather than travel to the United States. Between 2014 and 2016, there was a 311% increase in asylum requests in Mexico. In the first 3 months of 2017, Mexico has received more asylum applications than all of 2015. Even with this increasing demand for caseworkers and legal representatives, barely much has been done to improve the legal processes for asylum. People are staying in shelters for months as they wait for their documents to be processed, for some over a year. Many asylum cases are being delayed, over 45 days, which is considered a strategy of the Mexican state to force people to abandon their processes, so that the government can report at a high acceptance rate while effectively preventing many people from gaining asylum. As reported by WOLA, crimes and abuses against migrants traveling through Mexico continue to occur at alarming rates, and shelters have noted a more intense degree of violence in the cases they document.